It's Sunday, June 22, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News. Our guest today is one of the great thinkers, a political commentator and author of several books, including American Rule, How a Nation Conquered the World but Failed Its People, and The Midnight Kingdom, A History of Power, Paranoia, and the Coming Crisis. Jared Yates Sexton, welcome back to the Weekend Show.
Anthony, my friend, always a pleasure, even as we're talking about unpleasurable things.
Well, I was going to say welcome to the Coming Crisis, as you so well identified with your book title. We are in unprecedented and uncharted territory. We are definitely in the midst of a constitutional crisis. I think people have acknowledged that, although people can't quite say it, but that's where we're at. We seem to be under authoritarian dictatorship, which many of us, including yourself, warned of in so many words. And we're now seeing the likes of opposition politicians, Alex Padilla, handcuffed, arrested by heavy-handed law enforcement for questioning authority, a judge arrested in her own courthouse and charged with helping a defendant evade arrest, masked snatch squads arresting people from the streets and being intimidating in the process. I mean, this is not the America that I emigrated to. Is this the America that you grew up in?
I mean, unfortunately, it is. And that is one of the things that I think gets lost. We've lived under an American mythology for a very long time. We don't like to sit with the founding of this country. We don't like to sit with the actions within this country. The actual story of America is a battle, a constant waxing and waning battle between authoritarianism and democracy. And unfortunately, because America does not like to sit with that fact. In fact, we become violent if we have to in order to silence any telling of that story, because we have lived in this absolutely aggressive denial of who we are and who we have been. We have landed in a pretty inevitable and predictable spot. We had many opportunities to change this. We had many opportunities to change course. And that is one of the reasons why a lot of us saw where this was going, is because we were able to recognize it and read the writing on the wall. And now we have to do a lot of different things, Anthony. We have to recognize both how we got here, where we are, and where we need to go. And that has never been a strong American suit, which is one of the reasons we're seeing so many of these power grabs, so many of these unconstitutional and also immoral and unethical actions. So we are in the middle of the crisis, which is actually a lot of different interlocking crises that have come to a head because we've been in denial about them and haven't chosen to actually address them and make better on them. So it is a really, really poor state of affairs. But the way that you just addressed it and summarized it is not only accurate, but it's a call to recognize where we are, where we've been, and where we need to go.
It's so interesting to me that you're not surprised, because many people are. And there are people who are like, well, I never saw this coming, or how dare he? And the reality is that we are really seeing people's true colors. I talk mainly of the Republican Party because they're the ones who have the controlling stake here. The actual members of Congress and the Senate who are Republican, who support Donald Trump, who have the ability to either impeach him, to remove him, to recognize what is happening to America, not just domestically, but on the world stage, and want to act. Why do you think there is zero appetite for that?
Well, I think when you look at the Republican Party, there are so many different factors here. We look at them a lot of the time in our popular coverage as a homogenous group of people, right? They're the exact same no matter where you look. And I think what we've seen since the rise of Trumpism, you had a group of what I would refer to as old neoliberal Republicans. Their main purpose was deregulation, getting rid of taxes, and basically serving the wealth class, making sure that they got a larger and larger slice of the pie. Since then, in order to create MAGA, different groups have had to come together under the same tent, right? They have a binding agent, which is an authoritarian impulse. The idea that power at all cost is what they need in order to create their vision of the world. Now we have this new situation with the possibility of war with Iran, which is starting to reveal the different sort of ideologies that are at play here. They go to war with one another. And from that, I think it's useful to understand that there are certain members of the Republican Party who are members of a personality cult. They're an authoritarian cult of personality with Donald Trump. They see him as infallible. They see him as perfect. In a lot of ways, what they are doing is they're ordering their world in a childish-like way. They're looking for a father figure so that they can be free to be unfree. We also have other Republicans who are still trying to do what I just described, which is to continue to help the wealth class become wealthier and wealthier. Then we have other people, whether or not they're oligarchs, whether or not they're techno-fascist, white nationalists, Christian nationalists, you name it, who have their own agendas that they are following. So in a lot of ways, it is an emperor has no clothes type situation. Anybody who recognizes Donald Trump for what he is understands that he is a buffoonish clown. He has no idea what he's doing most of the time. He's unwell, unhealthy, unstable, and his acuity is declining every single day. The people within the party and throughout this cult of personality, they are at different levels of either recognizing that or engaging in aggressive denial of that fact. But the main point here is that their agendas are still being served. When we see the friction between them is when those agendas start to rub against each other and have contradictions. I don't have a lot of hope that Republicans are, what we hear during Biden, they're going to wake up from their nightmare, right? Or the fever will break at some point. I do not believe that that is true. I think the Republican Party has entered a terminal decline. They're in a terminal downward spiral, and anything moving forward that is going to be conducive or that is going to be healthy or progressive is not going to involve the Republican Party getting on board. It's going to be work around them and beyond them at this point. So I think looking at it, you have to see all of the different factions, but also understand that they do not currently have an incentive to work against him.
Arguably, they're taking advantage of his inadequacies and his misdemeanors and his dementia, if I can go that far. It is of use to them that he is a subpar candidate. He might be a populist. He might be someone who has attracted this cult-like following, but his usefulness is entirely helpful to them by nature of his disinterest. I mean, Trump doesn't really care about anything other than himself, playing a bit of golf, staring at the girls at the pool at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, that's kind of where it ends. I think he likes music, actually. He said recently he likes music. So
he likes musicals.
Changes everything.
Yeah, and you know what's sad about this, Anthony, is it's a lot more helpful to view this not through a presidential lens, but through a monarchical lens, right? Which is what happens when you have a king who is unwell or isn't up to the job. And there is
precedent for this, as history says.
There's a vacuum of power and agency there that a lot of different interests take advantage of. So, just to give an example for people who might not understand this, we have shifted into a feudal mindset. Like in this situation with the possibility of war with Iran, there's been reportage that Trump doesn't really know what he wants to do. He's not actually up to this job, nor is it's an incredible thing. He is so arrogant and narcissistic and also incurious that he just thinks that he knows everything instinctually and doesn't even feel it necessary in order to be briefed with his job.
Right. He hasn't read the briefing papers. He's not read the intelligence reports. He's actually denying what the security services are saying, that Iran is not capable of enriching uranium and making any nuclear weapons. And Trump's like, I don't believe it. He knows better.
Exactly. And so what have we seen with that? We've seen reports that his decisions on this have actually been framed by Fox News. Right. And even people who participate on Fox News, including Republican senators and personalities, they understand this is a propaganda channel. They understand that they are presenting a skewed version of the world in order to influence people. We have a president who doesn't understand that. And we've even heard for years, Anthony, where this channel that was designed implicitly to create state propaganda, he thinks they're tough on him. They think that they are critical of him. Like they are the closest thing that he has to what he thinks as an impartial, media. And in that case, he literally is changed moment to moment based on who talks to him, who sucks up to him, who, pledges fealty and sort of like tells him what he wants to hear. What we have is a sick, ineffective, incurious, incompetent, monarchical figure. And so as a result, like anybody who is able to get in his ear at this point and talk to him in a way that feels persuasive or flattering, like that is the direction the country is going to go. And we've seen that now for years, and we've seen one example after another. And listen, I don't need to tell you or your listeners or viewers this. That's not an effective way to run a nation state. And that is the reason why we moved away from monarchies. There's a reason why we moved to liberal democracy was because we saw what happened in the old world. We saw that this wasn't effective. We saw that it led to death and suffering and just a terrible, nightmarish hell. And that's the reason liberal democracy took form, was explicitly to get away from situations like this.
I would argue, just as an aside, that a contemporary monarchy might be of use right now. To have somebody above the president who is non-political, but has the right to say, okay, enough. You're ruining my country.
I've actually heard people make really good arguments for the idea that the presidency of the United States of America is a flawed institution and that we need a political figurehead and we need a prime minister, somebody who actually takes care of like the hard work without having to engage in retail politics.
Yeah.
And at this point, and with the way that this entire American experiment has crashed on the rocks for a bunch of predictable reasons, I'm open to hearing that. Like, you know what I mean?
For the first time, I think, a lot of Americans, for the first time, are open to a system that can't be corrupted in the way that it has been presently. And because this is, control of the House, control of the Senate, control of the executive, control of the courts. There's not really much left for the Democrats or any opposition to fight with. And that is because the system has allowed Donald Trump this kind of annihilation of all the institutions.
So this might make people itchy, but I am probably one of the more leftist voices out there when it comes to this stuff. I personally think that our institutions, because I've done the research, I've looked at, what Madison had to say about this in his notes. I happen to know that these institutions were created for minoritarian power. They were created for a wealthy white class of privileged men to control everything and give people the illusion of democracy. The founders were absolutely terrified of the idea of democracy. There's a reason why they didn't want parties. They had one party, the Federalist Party, which ruled everything. I think the problem is that the institutions that you've brought up, the House of Representatives was created to give the illusion of democracy. The Senate was explicitly designed to give the wealth class power. We had some progress with that in the 20th century. It still needs reformed. You look at the Supreme Court, which is actually doing exactly what it was intended to do, which is to curb democracy and to keep power in certain hands. I look at the solutions as bringing more democracy in. I look at the Supreme Court and listen, people can talk about stacking it. I think the judges and justices, I think that they should be subject to direct democratic choosing. I actually think we should move away from those things. I think the Senate needs radically reformed. And quite frankly, the presidency, what we're dealing with now with Trump, Anthony, we've talked about one piece of legislation. They've put forward the supposed big, beautiful bill. Everything else has been done through executive orders and through emergency powers. We created a ticking time bomb here years ago when we handed more and more power over to this supposed unitarian executive. And as a result, we spent years saying, well, if the president uses this wisely, it'll be okay. We let a toddler come into a house that was wired to explode and we're shocked that it's exploding. So we need major reform. And so as a result, and this is one of the things that gives me hope, we're having more and more conversations about institutional change. And not only that, if you look at the polls, the vast majority of Americans recognize these institutions don't work and need reform. So this crisis, and I think this is a helpful way of looking at it, crisis often brings clarity. We see where the problems are. They're not able to be hidden anymore. And yes, is it frightening? Yes, is it dangerous? But this also gives us an opportunity for some self-introspection and reflection to decide what it is that we actually want versus what it is that we have, because it hasn't been working for a very long time.
And so going back to a flawed system would be a mistake, because that is winding the clock back as opposed to taking America to a new place. And this, I guess, is why things sometimes have to get so bad before they can get better. And maybe we're just in that moment of political history but the tragedy of that is that people in the process are being deported, manhandled, executed, imprisoned in countries they've never even been to. It's a very, very dark period. And if you are unfortunate enough to be born with the wrong surname or the wrong skin pigmentation or the wrong accent, then this indiscriminate kind of Nazi-style arrests that are going on around the country is what is your current reality. So could we just talk to that for a moment? Because, I've done, like you, a lot of research, and so much of my research takes me to a door with the word Nazis on it. Mm-hmm. And people don't use those words lightly because of the comparisons from history. But, aside from the worst atrocities of the Second World War, which came much later, what we're looking at now is very equivalent. The idea of kidnapping people, disappearing people, snatching people, unmarked vehicles, unmarked uniforms, people masked, not identifying themselves. And this has led to migrants and even some American citizens who've been arrested having to put posters up, missing posters, asking anybody in the community if they've seen their husband or if they've seen their mother or their wife. That's what it's come to for these communities.
Yeah, and I want to go ahead and put this into a context, because everything you just brought up is exactly correct. You're calling the situation based on what it is, as opposed to engaging in active, aggressive denial and delusion. An authoritarian like Donald Trump is not elected president in 2016 without things being in a dire state. And if you actually take a look at the supposed American empire, which I think is in decline, you end World War II by defeating the Nazis. What did we do immediately after that, Anthony? We brought the Nazis into the fold because we believed that we needed to defeat communists, socialists, and leftists. So what took place was a very thinly veiled operation of being friendly with Nazism and fascism for decades. We went around the world and worked with dictators who were friendly with America, and we saw them as very good opportunities. And when we had leftists being killed, unions being dissolved, people being oppressed, we said, hey, this is a great opportunity to exploit the people who are being oppressed, because people in authoritarian dictatorships, they work on the cheap, Anthony. You don't have to pay them a lot, and they show up to work because they're afraid that their families are going to be disappeared or killed. So we've played this game for decades now, in which we've had just a little bit of authoritarianism or authoritarianism elsewhere. And what eventually happens is that corruption, it corrupts completely. We've now reached the point, and this is what fascism is. And I think this gets lost a lot in the discussions and analysis. Fascism is when authoritarianism comes home. You do it everywhere else, whether it's in colonies, whether it's in, client states, whether it's places where we have other dictators. Eventually, because of the profit motives that are being served through those alliances, eventually you have to do it in your own country. The apparatus that we're dealing with right now has been in place in America for decades. You don't get to what we have now without the carceral state, which keeps minorities imprisoned, for things that they shouldn't have. Without a white supremacist legal system, without a corruptive legislature. You look at all these things, and by the way, the war on terror, Everything that's happening in America right now is what America did to other countries, including rendition, including taking people outside of our borders so that they can be tortured and incarcerated indefinitely. The surveillance state that we're currently watching Palantir create, it's a simple evolution of what we created after 9/11. So eventually what happens is, if you're authoritarian around the world, eventually you're going to be authoritarian within your borders. And so what you just brought up, what we're seeing, it's disgusting. It's absolutely horrifying. But in that moment of discomfort that you brought up, which unfortunately people are suffering through, it brings clarity, which is a need to recognize what's happening in America is wrong. When it's in your neighborhood, it's wrong. When it's happening to your friends and family members, it's wrong. It's also wrong when it happens in Gaza. It's also wrong when it happens in Iran. It's wrong when, and what I'm talking to you on a device right now that was put together by slave labor with resources that were extracted using dictatorial power. That's wrong. It's all wrong. So this is a moment where all of a sudden we can look around and say, we have not been living well. And for anybody who has ever struggled with addiction or knows someone who has, the change in the recovery happens when someone wakes up and says, I can't live like this anymore. My life has become unmanageable. Something has to change. So we can't just talk about going back. What was it this week? It was 10 years since Trump came down on the golden escalator, right? We can't go back to the moment before he came down the escalator because the moment was ready for him to come down the escalator. We have to recognize we can't just conserve what remains. We have to build something different, or else this thing is only going to continue to get worse and worse. So the point is, Nazism, fascism, authoritarianism. I traced it throughout history in the Midnight Kingdom, and here's the problem. It is a human condition, and we either deal with it and move forward and create something better, or we are doomed for it to get worse and worse for a variety of reasons.
It's important to remind people that it's not exclusive to the United States.
That's right.
And that there are many nations that are struggling with this shift to the far right. There are these populist leaders being elected in various nations that, including allies of the United States or former allies, you could argue, as America is pivoted to join forces with some of our former foes. Can we just talk briefly about the individuals in leadership who would claim that everything that's happening right now is for the good and is the right thing? The Tom Homans, the Kristi Noems, the Stephen Millers, the architects of these authoritarian tactics, because arguably Trump is pretty much checked out. He only finds out about these things when he sees them on Fox, as you said. And many of the former Fox hosts he's now put into his cabinet because that's all he knows, as you quite rightly say. And it is interesting that, Fox was set up by Roger Ailes to try and brainwash the people, but what it's ended up doing is brainwashing the president. And that is something I find utterly fascinating and completely terrifying. So what of these individuals who say that they're doing God's work and that this is, that this ethnic cleansing of America is essential? They say it with a straight face. They don't kind of go home and go, oh my God, what am I doing? I mean, this is very much the kind of Nazi general thing, isn't it? They are completely committed to the Führer.
Yeah, and that's a very good way of putting it. I try and explain to people because, people will say, how do they sleep at night? And the answer is like babies. And the reason is because, and this is a thing that I don't think most people understand, ideology in terms of a worldview is how you sort of square the circle for yourself, right? It's how you're doing awful things to people, but you tell yourself a narrative. I'm in the right. And what's underneath all of that? And you and I assume the people watching this, almost every single day, if not every single hour, we have moments where like, oh, was I right there? Or did I mess up there, right? And we even, it turns even into an anxiety where it makes you question yourself and it holds you back, right? You can almost become a prisoner with like self-introspection. These people do not have that. And the defining characteristic here, it's not just a democratic crisis. It's not just a political crisis. It's a mental health crisis. We are currently being ruled in the United States of America, and we see it all around the world. These people who hurt people, they're not well. They have grown up in an environment that is inherently authoritarian, whether or not it's their families, their communities, their religious communities, you name it. They have not been able to process that. And those of us who study the authoritarian mindset, we understand something, which is when you grow up in an abusive environment, and by the way, Donald Trump did as well. Donald Trump was abused by his own father. Elon Musk was abused by his own father. You have a choice to make, Anthony, which is you either push against that and you change and you try and treat people better, or you metastasize. And when you metastasize, what you actually do is you take the parts of yourself that don't conform to the authoritarian abuse and you crush them, you kill them, and then inevitably you project them out into the world. And right-wing authoritarianism, whether it's MAGA, Nazis, fascist, whether it's the Metternich regime, going back, centuries ago, what actually happens is they're projecting their own self-hatred into the world. They're looking around to hurt other people that represent something within them that they've had to kill and despise. This is one of the reasons why so many Republicans are exposed as being hypocrites when it comes to gay and trans rights, or why, they talk about family values. And meanwhile, Elon Musk has created himself, this new age harem. And what you actually, or Donald Trump is a perfect example of this. He talks about all these values and look how he's lived his life. And what you start to realize is that you can't trust these people with power because it never stops. They don't trust each other. They don't engage in solidarity with each other. They will stab each other in the back consistently, and they are not competent. There's no cohesion to what they do because they are hurting and they have to hurt other people to feel better about themselves. And this goes back to the original conversation we were having, which is this is no way to rule. This is no way to run a presidency or a country. It's inherently dysfunctional. And when you look at fascist movements, they're actually self-destructive, suicidal movements. They are pushing us further and further down a hole of oblivion because they can't help themselves. They're always heading for that cliff. And unfortunately, we're along for the ride as long as we don't stop them.
The propaganda has been like a giant game of telephone. Because I'm yet to see any Trump MAGA supporters saying that they have a specific problem with a specific immigrant in their town. There's no kind of direct issues. All of the issues are things they've seen on Fox or they've heard from the president about immigrants being bad. Well, we're now seeing, when Trump flip-flopped on going after the immigrants working in farming and agriculture and hospitality, that, they are an essential part of the workings of this nation. They put food on the table. They put food in the grocery stores. They keep your driveways clean and your cars clean, and they keep your cars from working and all this stuff. And to take that labor away is going to make a giant hole in the labor market. But the mere fact that this tribal movement of anti-immigrant hate is based entirely on these propaganda moves and not on any direct experience, because they're not, immigrants are not taking the jobs that American people want to do anyway, and there doesn't seem to be a thought out plan for how this ends. In the same way that when we go into foreign wars and we go in with a great idea of bringing democracy, and of course that is impossible. And then it's like, okay, we leave with our tails between our legs. And this is going to be the same thing. You blame the immigrants, you go after the immigrants, you deport the immigrants, and then there's no end game. There's nobody to replace them picking fruit. There's nobody to replace them doing this kind of regular work. And so you end up crashing your own economy.
Yeah, so there's a divide here between the political expression of what you're describing and the actual logistical expression of what you're describing. So for instance, going back to what we were talking about with MAGA, everything that they are pushing is emotional. It's all, there's a threat here, we have to take care of it, we have to get rid of it. But then behind the scenes, and this is, again, not the context that is ever given in any sort of analysis, people said to me they're going to drive out all the immigrants. I said, no, they're not. because they are absolutely essential for the wealthy of America in order to continue to profit. They are an underclass, that's what they call them, that's how they see them, of people that they can rely on for cheaper than minimum wage labor with no regulations. The wealth class has no desire whatsoever to get rid of immigrants. The plans that have been made and have been carried out so far have been about creating that underclass. It's about both getting what they want politically, getting a person in who will lower taxes and get rid of regulations and slash every single social safety program. But it's about also creating an environment where immigrants will not speak up, where they won't organize, where they won't demand better treatment. They're so terrified of being sent to a hell prison in El Salvador that they won't actually push back when people are using them for their labor. This cutout you just described with Trump saying this for hotel workers or service workers or construction or whatever it is, that was always going to happen. There was no chance whatsoever that they were going to, quote unquote, get rid of all immigrants because America relies on it and the wealth class wants them.
It was very exposing, wasn't it? Just in the short 48 hours that the flip-flop happened, it was very exposing about how, there was no critical thinking behind these decisions. Clearly, I think Stephen Miller went crazy.
Right.
There was an argument, and then they kind of continued with the policy of arresting everybody.
So what it reminds me of the most historically, Anthony, is what happened with slavery in the United States of America. Because slavery was an economic condition that put, God knows how many people in ruinous bondage and abuse. But it was necessary for the South, or so they claimed, in order to have their type of life. And meanwhile, it was fueled by this idea, they're coming for you. They're going to come for your wives, for your daughters. Look what happened in Haiti. They're going to rise up and kill all of us. We have to continue on with this bondage. But the economic conditions and the political and social conditions, they rub against each other, right? And so what happens is you have to create this underclass, an enslaved class, which is what makes an ethno-state work. The same thing happened in Nazi Germany. Did they want to eliminate the Jews? Absolutely they did. You know what else they wanted? Slave labor. They wanted to take a group of people that they could vilify and demonize and use them as unpaid labor in order to build their supposed empire. So when those schisms happen, they happen because the majority of people in MAGA surrounding Donald Trump, they're living in a fantasy. And they're not looking at the actual material conditions of what's happening. So we're not going to be able to, quote unquote, deport all immigrants. It would not only crash the economy, it would hurt the wealth class that is funding and operating this thing in the first place. And by the way, what I just described, Donald Trump doesn't understand any of that. And the people around him don't understand any of that. It's the wealth class that is directing this. The same people who created Project 2025 are the people who oversee this project and make sure that it continues. So there is a difference between the actual material reality and the political reality. And when we start to see those schisms, it's because you have a lot of people who are lost in a complete delusional fantasy. And meanwhile, they are also voting and supporting not necessarily just an ethno-state project, but an ethno-state project that uses the vilified and demonized for unpaid or underpaid exploited labor. And so, yeah, they can't do it, but they also don't understand that because they're not operating from a logical standpoint. They're helping to create a situation that they don't even know they're creating.
The main crux of Trump's argument about immigrants is that they, as you said earlier, they're coming for you, but they're bringing drugs and they're criminals and they're from gangs and also they're from mental institutions, which we now know he got that because he didn't know what seeking asylum meant and took the word asylum and saw that to mean coming from mental institutions. Remarkable, really, that this guy is the leader of the former free world. But anyway, the reality is that anybody who lives or cares to ask an immigrant, and I'll speak up for them just momentarily, is that we go out of our way to pay our taxes, to not break the law, to abide by the requirements of our visas, to show up for our immigration hearings, and to be good future U.S. citizens. That's why we come here, to assimilate, and we are thankful from the moment we arrive. And none of that is taken into consideration when Trump refers to immigrants. The statistics say that it is white Americans that are committing the crimes, that are doing the raping and bringing the drugs and all of the things that he claims. That those are his people, supposedly, that are the ones committing those crimes. And we saw that very recently with this tragedy in Minnesota, where the first thing that Trump and his surrogates did was claim that this shooter was a Democrat because he was hired by Tim Walz at some point, which is completely inaccurate. Of course, it turns out that he's a InfoWars fan. He's in one of these Christian cults and is very much a MAGA Republican. So, I mean, that's what we're dealing with, right?
No, it absolutely is. And I'm glad that you brought up the Minnesota situation, because I was going to use that as my example. Notice how this stuff gets discussed, Anthony. This person goes in Minnesota, kills a state representative, shoots a couple of other people, and also had a list of, I think it was roughly 70 people that he wanted to hurt. We treat this as if it's some lone nut, right? And if you actually take a look at the context of the past decade and even beyond that, I mean, you can take this decades out. What we're actually dealing with is a large domestic authoritarian terroristic threat. We have these mass shootings, right? And we always talk about them as their one lone nut who goes in and murders a bunch of people. And what inevitably happens is that a manifesto leaks. And the manifesto is talking about white replacement theory. It's talking about minorities coming for jobs and immigrants coming for jobs. We're actually dealing with a very giant domestic terrorist threat. But we don't want to connect those dots, because if we connect those dots, we would actually have to look at the fact that white supremacy is the problem in this country. But if one black person or one immigrant gets charged with a crime, that is a bigger dot unto itself. It's proof that there's a larger existential problem. And that brings us to what has actually been the undercurrent here that people want to be in denial about. White supremacy is not just a belief that people are born a certain way and they're inherently better than other people. I talked about how ideology is a story that makes us feel better. Fascism, authoritarianism, and authoritarianism light, which is what America has dealt with for a long time, it's dividing the world into people who deserve something and people who deserve nothing. Those who deserve rights and resources and those who deserve punishment, control, and death. And we've heard that. It always ends up going this, pardon the expression, black or white, like one person is a law-abiding citizen, another person is a criminal. This person is a citizen, this person's a terrorist. And that dividing up of the world, and it isn't just within MAGA. We've seen it consistently. This country has a huge problem in viewing things through that lens and getting rid of all relevant context. But the point is that we have an existential threat, and the existential threat is white supremacy and the violence that it wreaks. And this government has not only turned a blind eye to that, they've turned the dial up on that. And they have made that the defining ideology of their followers and of their agenda. And that only goes one place. And it goes towards extermination, eugenics. It goes towards full-blown fascism. And when that takes the controls, instead of talking about how do we actually share resources, like how do we all get better? How do we live in a better world? Instead, we're saying there's only so many resources. These people are going to have to suffer and die, which is the reason not only that people are in concentration camps now and being deported to El Salvador, it's why you're starting to see it with Democratic politicians, Democratic cities, why you've seen it for forever with unhoused populations. You've seen it with gay and trans people. You've seen it with black people who have had their protections and liberties taken away. It is an enlarging sphere that says, no, you're on the outside, and then the sphere shrinks. And it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until the most vulnerable people, marginalized people, are told, there's nothing for you here. The only thing that you have now is violence and oppression and exploitation. And that is the cycle of not just white supremacy, but authoritarianism, which is fed and works based on white supremacy.
Thursday was Juneteenth. Not a mention from the White House or the president, basically eradicated from the schedule. And that really just goes to prove your point about this white supremacy and denial of history. And if you were to buy a Trump-branded Bible, the sections On the, there's the pages of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights are also packed into that document that he sells. Anything about any reference to slavery, that's already been removed. We have to take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about Iran and Trump's desire to bypass Congress and start a new war in the Middle East. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. You know how they say that we spend a third of our lives in bed? Well, that really hit me because what we're sleeping on matters. And that's why I switched to an avocado mattress. Avocado is all about better for you, better for the planet. Their mattresses are handcrafted using certified organic latex, cotton and wool. No toxic chemicals, no synthetic junk, just clean, breathable materials that help me sleep cooler and deeper, especially with summer heat coming. I went with the Avocado Green mattress, their bestseller, and I get why. It's insanely comfortable, supportive, and I love knowing it's sustainably made. Plus, they've got options from ultra-luxurious to radically affordable, so you can find the perfect fit. Take their mattress quiz. It's super helpful. And with a 1-year sleep trial, easy financing, and stores you can try them in, there's really no reason not to dream of better. Because honestly, organic really does sleep better. Shop now at avocadomattresses.com and save 15% on certified organic mattresses. Dream of better. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Jared Yates Sexton. I'm Anthony Davis. Jared, as we're recording this, Donald Trump has requested an immediate ceasefire or something. I'm not entirely sure what he was asking of the Iranians. The Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has rejected Trump's calls for surrender in the face of these blistering Israeli strikes and warned that any military involvement by the Americans would cause irreparable damage to them. We talked earlier about Trump not really understanding how the war has been playing out over decades and how destabilized that region is. He doesn't read the briefing documents. He doesn't take any real interest. And so you saw him being asked on Air Force One, what would you say to the Iranians? And he kind of looks up as if he doesn't have a policy. And he says, well, I'm looking for an end. I want it to end. But he didn't really say what he wanted to end. And then when he's asking for an unconditional surrender, surrendering what exactly? There is just simply no detail. Trump has not really used Congress at all, as we discussed earlier, for any of these policies that he's put in place. He's effectively operating as a rogue president. And there is no due process, both inside his administration and outside for the people that he's seeking to arrest. This is destabilizing the world, but it's also created a more isolationist America, where as a country it cannot be trusted now by its former allies.
Yeah, and you know what strikes me is that even your enunciation of what is going on is so far beyond what Donald Trump understands. That's the really frightening thing here, is that Donald Trump has worked on instinct his entire time. He knows how to vilify people. He knows how to stoke anger and fear. Meanwhile, we just talked earlier about what MAGA is and all these different competing ideologies. You know what they agree on? They agree on going after gay and trans people, taking away the rights of black people, going after immigrants, vilifying them, taking away women's rights, and also, again, enriching the wealthy and the powerful. You know what they don't have? They do not have a cohesive foreign policy strategy. They have no idea of what they're doing. And you're actually watching a lot of the contradictions take place now. There is a cohort within MAGA of white nationalists who are actually in line with Vladimir Putin and one of his closest ideologues, Alexander Dugin. And you see that with someone like Tucker Carlson. And that entire idea is that neoliberal globalism, which is the defining order of the world, which is what has propped up, the American empire, that we should all retreat into isolationist spheres of influence. Russia should be over here taking care of its area. China should be over here taking care of its area. And America takes care of like North America, possibly South America. The idea behind that is that each of these countries would become their own ethno-states, would become more religious and more authoritarian, and then maybe down the road they'll have it out and they'll figure out who runs the world, right? There's no room in there for the United States of America to go in the Middle East and bomb places. So now you're seeing Tucker Carlson and other white nationalists who are against these things. Meanwhile, there's still neoconservatives, and for people who don't know what that means, think about George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, and some of them are anti-Trump. And they're very excited about this because they've wanted to go after Iran and exploit their resources for forever. You also have Christian nationalists. Anthony, they want this because they literally want the end of the world. They believe that going to war with Iran and getting Israel in a place of power will lead to the second coming of Jesus Christ. If everything I just described sounds contradictory, confusing, and bewildering, that's only because it is. And now we have a person in Donald Trump doesn't understand any of this, has no actual movements. The only thing that he's accomplished so far is what has been designed for him by Project 2025. He's basically Ronald McDonald rolling out the new cheeseburger at McDonald's that has been designed by food scientists and a bunch of marketing strategists. He has no idea about any of this stuff. He's the messenger.
Nor interest either.
Nor interest. So now you have a situation, and it's bad enough that he doesn't have an interest in this. It's also bad enough that he's entirely persuadable by people who flatter him and show fealty to him or want to enrich him. We also have another problem in the midst of all of this. He has some of the most historic war powers that emergency powers that a president has ever had. And so he can decide to do something without any informed idea of what's going on. And he's also president as the American empire declines. The reason that Israel has carried out what they've done in Gaza, and they've even said it out loud, they said, we expected America to pull us back. We expected America to tell us enough is enough. And anybody who studies empires knows that when they decline, their proxies, their client states, they start doing what they want to do, and they have no ability to do anything about them. Israel can do whatever it wants. Saudi Arabia can do whatever it wants, because if America says no, they'll go to Russia or China. So it's a non-winning situation for America. And now the supposed greatest empire in the history of the world is about to get drug into a situation. No one knows how this thing's going to play out. No one knows where it's going to go. And by the way, it reeks of the Iraq war in ways that I don't even know how to fully express.
I know. Weapons of mass destruction just rattles around in my head.
Regime change will be welcomed as liberators. It's the exact same game, same exact story. And now here's the problem, Anthony. It's even worse than Iraq, which is one of the worst mistakes America's ever made, because we're on the precipice of World War III as America declines. And as empires decline, everything's up for negotiation. This is why Putin was able to go into Ukraine. This is why China has been able to enlarge its sphere. So what happens when an empire goes into decline is it loses its influence. The gravity of its reality that it wants starts to shrink. Things start absolutely falling apart as all these different sort of border skirmishes and regional things fall apart. So we have the worst person at the worst time in the worst circumstance. And so when you put all those things together, I listen, I'm not an engineer, but I know enough to know that if multiple parts of a machine are starting to fall apart, it's likely that the machine's going to fall apart and things are going to go badly. And so this is a bad situation, and it's only getting worse with every passing hour.
The naivety of disbanding what I have always thought was one of America's greatest achievements, and that is USAID, this soft power around the world, supporting nations, educating people, doing away with disease, bringing medicines, bringing supplies, bringing shelter. The fact that that was the first thing that the Trump regime chose to eradicate was very telling, because it didn't just expose the racism, but it also exposed the naivete regarding what the influence of USAID has on the world stage. And as you just mentioned, China, Russia, they fill in the gaps in these regions, and therefore their strength as a nation grows. America is a very weak nation, despite Donald Trump having his military parade, which supposedly was to celebrate 250 years of the army, which of course was just to celebrate his 79th birthday, was a disaster. And apparently he was furious because it didn't show America as the mighty nation that he was hoping. He wanted one of these North Korean-style parades, and what he got was more like a family fun day with creaky tanks. And this, but that is what America is right now on the world stage. It is a bit of a laughingstock. And the G7 was a perfect example of this meeting last week in Alberta, Canada, hosted by Mark Carney, where Trump decided after 24 hours that he'd had enough and decided to leave, not before dropping several bombshells that Vladimir Putin was very upset about being kicked out of the G8, hence it becoming the G7, behaving as a messenger boy for the Kremlin. I mean, that was very telling in those moments.
Yeah, and to bring all these threads together, I think some context is necessary. First of all, the destruction of USAID by conservative estimates is going to lead to hundreds of thousands of deaths. And we're never going to know the full extent of what taking that away will be. We also need to take a look at a program like USAID and say, we should live in a world where we don't need that. We should live in a world, because basically the countries that are receiving aid from that organization have been held in check and in arrested development because the United States of America wanted a world order in which they could exploit those people. Like, if you look around, people say, well, why can't this country get things together? In fact, people say, why do we have so many people coming through our borders? It's because the United States has kept them in political turbulence because it's been advantageous for the United States of America. So that Band-Aid, that sort of thing that was trying to keep things together at the same time, taking that away just leads to the inevitable suffering that was always going to be caused by American empire. The point is this. We have now reached the point where the American empire and the post-World War II order, it's been exposed as hubristic and destructive, and it didn't work. It was held together by tape for a very long time because of economic and political conditions. Now that it's falling apart, we can look at this and we can actually look back over these past 70 years and say, that wasn't the project we should have had. We should have created a collaborative world order that helped everybody and made sure that people weren't going to suffer and die of starvation and unnecessary disease. We shouldn't have worked with these dictators. On top of that, Anthony, we kept on mobilizing immediately after World War II. We created not just the Cold War, but a state in which the American military, which you just brought up, and I can't think of a better metaphor, at the end of American empire than that parade. And we had 250 years of the American military, and then you have this farce of a ceremony that reveals we can't even plan a parade. The only thing that has kept us in power is oppressing people and hurting people and engaging in light authoritarianism and full authoritarianism around the world. So what you just brought up is we're actually seeing the consequences of decades of mismanagement and abuse. It was able to hold on for a while, but like a person with a chronic disease, at the end you realize for years they should have treated that disease. They should have went to a doctor. They should have tried to get help. They should have tried to do something different. But not doing that, it leads to a terminal condition. And so we've arrived at the natural endpoint for the way that we've ruled the world for the past 70 years. And now it's becoming very clear we made the wrong choices. And along the way, it was very clear to a lot of people that we made the wrong choices. It should be a moment of clarity. But instead, it's a moment of terminal illness. And it doesn't have to be that way. There's still time to take care of this. But what we're seeing is where this thing was heading all along.
So let's talk about taking care of it for a moment, because the same day as Trump's military family fun day was a protest like America has never seen. Tens of millions of people taking to the streets in all cities right across the country, mobilizing, activated, and with a great sense of urgency. And the message was actually less diluted than I've ever seen before. It was there was much more clarity. This idea that America does not want a king. It was very clear that Donald Trump has overstepped his authority, that the rule of law is something that we require our leaders to abide by, and that people are not going to stand for it. There was no, as we were talking about with Fox earlier, there was obviously a lot of propaganda from the right saying that, it was a day of violence, which it simply wasn't. We know about the reason for this protest coming about as it did was because of Trump trying to make an example of California by sending in the National Guard, federalizing the National Guard, sending in the Marines to support the National Guard. And that really was too much for a lot of people, including many Republicans too. So let's talk about this No Kings movement. Let's talk about the idea that people are now ready to step up. And, there is talk of pushing for regime change in this country by the people. How does this come about?
Yeah, so that's the big question. It's what I've been working on, when I'm not doing interviews like this. In my organizing work, it's trying to get people to realize, unfortunately, we can't expect the Democratic Party to simply step up and move away from their billionaire donors. We can't simply expect the media to realize that they're not covering this the correct way. And there reaches a point, and it reminds me historically of what happened at the turn of the 20th century. And for people who don't know, at the turn of the 20th century, basically America was held captive by a group called the robber barons. These were the industrialists who had created the modern America and basically hoarded all of the resources. And guess what they did? Because historically it happens. It happened in Britain, by the way, with the first corporations that gained all of the control. They inevitably corrupt the legislative body and the culture. They own the media apparatus. They own the politicians. They basically own everything that you could own. At the turn of the 20th century, people stood up and said, I don't want to live like this anymore. I don't want to work in a mine next to my 5-year-old child. I don't want my family dying young deaths. This isn't right. So what did they do? They stood up and they organized. And they started doing the battle. That's how you got the populist or the progressive movement. Man, I'm trying to remember these names sometimes. The progressive movement of the early 20th century was when people came together. And what did they achieve? They dislodged the robber barons. They reformed democracy. That's how we got the direct election of senators. That's how we got the women's vote. And we saw it again in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when the civil rights movement came together and said, we need to be treated fairly. The Democratic Party and Lyndon Baines Johnson didn't wake up one morning and say, I want to sign the civil rights legislation. It took collective action. And so here's what I keep telling people, Anthony. On the last Saturday during the No Kings protest, and I went to my area's one, look around at the people and say, there are a lot of us. And it certainly seems like we're all seeing this through the right lens, which is, this is actually a class war. We're dealing with a dictatorial regime that is helping the wealthy and hurting everybody else. And if you come together, the next step is not just having a rally. It's not just having the largest rally in the history of the United States over one day. It's coming together and developing an agenda. It's starting to pressure both the Democratic Party to change, which is what the Tea Party did in 2010, which was a complete fake front for the wealth class, which is part of how we got to MAGA. You force the Democratic Party to change their circumstances. You force the media to pay attention to it, even though they're owned by the wealth class. And what we have to develop next, Anthony, is we have to develop an agenda. And I think it's pretty clear where we've gone wrong in this country. I think it's pretty clear what we need to do to fix this thing, but we're going to have discussions about that. And if that's not enough, and this is something that we need to talk about, look around at all the people that you saw, tens of thousands. In some cities, it was hundreds of thousands. What happens if those people don't show up to work on Monday? What happens to this country? Who has the power then? And I'm not saying that this is easy. Like, organizing is hard work. And for the record, the wealth class has decades worth of a head start on us. But it is going to take us putting ourselves on the line. Some of us are going to get hurt. Some of us are going to get injured. Some of us are going to lose our jobs. But we have to push for something different. And we have to understand that democracy is not like a spectator sport. It's not something you watch on MSNBC. It's not, we've been given this morality play. This good person is fighting this bad person. No, there's a larger situation, and it's not about posting. It's not about reposting. It's not about any of that. It's about the fact that when you have an authoritarian regime, you have to fight back. And it's going to make us do uncomfortable things, but there's really no choice at this point. We know where we're going. We see it clearly, and we have to figure out something better and realer and more human.
So the withdrawal of labor is a very powerful tool. It would almost mean fundraising, not for a political party, but fundraising for the people, to give them some money to tie themselves over whilst they're not working. Because even working conditions in the US differ so much from Europe. And the reason that we often see more explicit protest in Europe is because people are afforded the opportunity to protest without getting a criminal record, without being jailed for 10 years for setting fire to a car. It's just treated differently. Dissent is part of democracy. But in the US, the penalties for criminal damage are so harsh, and people are living paycheck to paycheck, so they can't necessarily lose their job because then they lose their health insurance. And so being activated and being involved is much more of an ask. But we've kind of crossed that line now, haven't we? We've got to a point where people are seeing their neighbors being kidnapped. And that is a step too far for many people. And so what I'm hoping is that kind of elastic will snap. Are we there yet? Or are we just at the very start of the stretch?
I mean, I think we're at the start of the stretch, but we need to be at the snap. And I want to say a few things because I think you nailed it dead to rights here. And some of the things I'm about to say are going to make some people uncomfortable. And listen, we're in uncomfortable times, and so we need to. And even if you don't agree with me, I want people to hear someone saying it. First things first, I really don't care if a Waymo car gets set on fire. I really don't care if an abandoned police cruiser that's being used to oppress people gets set on fire. And what's more, I don't care if it's police or National Guard or ICE. If someone goes into an elementary school and attempts to kidnap children, what would you do if they didn't have the word ICE on their shirt? You would stop them. And we have reached that point. Nobody blames the Jews in Warsaw for fighting back. They knew what they were doing and they knew what they were fighting. That's an uncomfortable feeling because what does this country always talk about? It's in all of the coverage, Anthony. They're not talking about human lives. It's one single word that dots every one of these broadcasts: property. And who do they talk to? Former FBI agents, former police officers. They're not talking to the protesters. We are taught to just go along with this thing and expect people to take care of it for us. And that brings me to the second uncomfortable point. All of that money that you have given to Democratic politicians or Democratic groups, you need to start giving that money to mutual aid groups in your communities. You need to create a system that takes care of all the social programs that have been slashed, and on top of that, helps the people who need help. And in engaging in local organizing, you're going to find the people who will not only go to that protest with you, but who won't show up to work on Monday with you. Those are, and it's a real big ask because neoliberalism tied our health insurance to our jobs. It made us all feel more precarious. We're all terrified to lose our living. We're all, living basically paycheck to paycheck at this point. We need to create structures that take care of one another. If someone loses their job because they're protesting against an authoritarian regime, they need to know they'll have food to eat. They need to know that they'll have a place to go. And until we build those things, we're not going to do the actual fight against authoritarianism. We're going to do this dance back and forth where we call on politicians to take care of it, even though they've shown that they're not willing to. We are the people who are going to have to solve this. And if you look around the world, you brought up Europe. Look at France. France has neoliberal leadership in Emmanuel Macron. He's kept honest by the fact that if he does something wrong, the streets are going to be full and the economy is going to be endangered because people are going to say we're not going along with that. We need that and we need more. And any movement that's actually going to change things, it's going to take us risking things.
You talk about the Democrats. There is a power vacuum that we are witnessing. And Chuck Schumer ain't the one to fill it.
He ain't the one.
Right. Hakeem Jeffries talks in riddles and I find to be quite confusing. And I don't know what the American lawmakers' obsession with like poster boards with graphics on it are. We don't have that in Europe, showing up to into the chamber holding these printed. I mean, printers must be doing a great business right now. But other than that, the people are still poor. The people who need help are still poor. And I include Trump supporters in this. There doesn't seem to be that realization yet that for everything that Trump has said, that they are still poor. They are still having to live off of credit cards. They are still getting into debt. They are still having to beg, steal, and borrow and live hand to mouth. Do you think that this movement that you describe could start to encompass some of the people who supported Trump who now regret their vote? And because that's really how this changes, is when instead of it just being former Democrats, it's everybody, it's the people. The people are everybody. And that would seriously frighten the current regime.
I would say, first of all, when it comes to the Democrats who aren't showing up, and I think you're exactly right about Schumer and Jeffries, people need to understand that the responsibility of people like Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries is not to fight authoritarianism. It's to keep the money flowing in from big money donors within the Democratic Party. And it just so happens that the billionaire donors that they're trying to appease are absolutely terrified by the Democratic base, which is expecting them to fight authoritarianism and help people. You brought up people like accruing more and more debt. They're paid and given donations by the people who want that debt. So they're not going to stand up against those things. That doesn't mean that every Democrat is like that. It means that we need to accept that some of them are. And again, I talked about enslavement a while ago. There used to be a party in this country called the Whigs. And the Whigs were one of the two major dominant parties. You know when they weren't? When they showed that they weren't willing to fight the Confederates in waiting, that they weren't ready to fight for abolition. That's how you end up getting the Republican Party for people who don't know politics. And this movement that we're talking about here, it is about exerting pressure that says to the Democrats, you either start listening to your base, who they have decried, who they started to use these words, Anthony, they call them these groups. Right? Which are the people that they blame for the 2024 loss, which include gay and trans people, people of color, the poor, the women who are like getting in their way. They're the ones who mess things up. And what needs to happen is they need to feel the pressure of these quote unquote groups. Hey, you're not going to be around unless you change. We'll find a new party if we have to. There's more of us than there are of you. And then you bring it into the other sphere, which you brought up, which is, I do think that there are some people, there are so many people who voted, and nobody likes to think about this. There are people who voted Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump. Yes. There are people who have vacillated back and forth. You can get some of those people. Yes. And they have a fantasy about who Donald Trump is, and occasionally that breaks when it hurts them. You will get some of them. You're not going to get most of them. Most of them are lost in a delusional cult of personality. The other people that need to get brought in are the people who sit out these elections. Even though we've had historic turnout, we still have a massive amount of Americans who have given up on politics in general because they don't believe that they're being served by politicians. And they're right. That's the worst part about this, is the people who have said nothing really changes in my life, even, if I win this election, they're not incorrect. And so when I talk to people and they're like, oh, what do you make of this lack of faith in parties and institutions? I say good, because we need to try something different. And the people need to make it known that they're not going to continue going down this path and they expect something better. And so this movement, it can make that happen. And historically speaking, looking at these cycles, that's the only thing that will make it happen. Because expecting suddenly for politicians to start doing something different than they've ever done before, it gets you nowhere. It gets you to where we are right now.
A perfect example of what you're describing about, big money in politics was this young vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, David Hogg, a former Parkland kid who divided the party over his plans to intervene in primary races against sitting Democratic lawmakers. And then basically just got kicked out. I mean, the kid is 25. He had some great ideas, but his senior was like, well, if you do this, I can't raise funds anymore. And you're basically blowing the whole system up. And so off he went. I mean, that was us getting close to change. And, the pendulum just swung back again.
I knew that Hogg was going to be gone the moment that he announced intentions to primary Democrats. It was just a matter of what apparatus and what levers they were going to find. And the reason that I knew that is because, yes, a party does represent the interest of its base when things are great and things aren't falling apart, or whenever they feel the pressure to do so. But what else is a party supposed to do? It's a fundraising apparatus. It's part of a very large financial system, which is what we've seen, particularly with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And what did we see back in 2016 and then in 2020 and then 2024? We have seen that the Democratic Party is neurotic and it has a control fetish. It doesn't want things that are outside of its control. We saw this with Bernie Sanders and how it moved away from him, and we saw all these different levers come together to push him out. In 2020, it became even more obvious when all of these members of the primary, they got together in a room or on a call, and Barack Obama was like, Joe Biden's the one, get behind him, let's go. And we saw where that led us. 2024, we saw another situation where by consensus, they came across the new nominee when Biden had to be forced out. So the Democratic Party has been forced to really consolidate power and avoid any type of pushback. It's not the first time it's happened with the Democratic Party. There have been stops and spurts and all of that. Barack Obama, by the way, his gaining of the nomination, the Democratic Party was pushing against him until he won the nomination, and then suddenly he became the greatest thing that ever happened to the party. They're risk averse. They've become conservative. And in the face of all of this, they don't have what it takes to fight this thing. Doesn't mean that won't change, but it's not going to happen organically. It's going to have to take pressure from the base and from the people. And that's what we see the beginnings of right now.
So let's talk to the people who didn't vote. The people who, as you said, well, my vote doesn't change anything. And also to the people who thought they were voting and their vote got purged, for example. There was an awful lot of voter suppression, and there is a high chance that leading into the midterms that Trump will be flexing all of these authoritarian muscles, and in the states who control the legislatures who have control of this vote will be gunning for Trump in their using various methods and the many new voting laws that have come into place that will suppress the vote. But we, in the short term, because it is a short term, we're only, 18 months away from midterms anyway, Trump's name is not even going to be on the ballot. So that's going to change things. So how do you encourage everybody to come out and vote for Democratic candidates in the short term, just so that some change can be made in Congress? Control of the House can be taken back to people who live in reality as opposed to in a cult-like mentality. Because I see this as a short-term thing and a long-term thing. Long-term is a reboot and to rebuilding. But in the short term, you have to overthrow the dictator, surely.
Yeah, and it starts with another uncomfortable thing, which is I'm not thinking about 2026 or 2028. I can't, because I don't want to take it for granted that there will be free and fair elections. Either there won't be elections, or we could have an illiberal democracy like Russia, in which you have elections and no one trusts the results. So saying, hey, we can get to 2026 and things will get better, we're only in June of 2025. We still have the rest of this year and next year in order to get there. I don't take any of that for granted, and in an emergency, you can't. When it comes to talking to people who are not necessarily allied with you or haven't caucused with you or voted with you, this is another uncomfortable thing because it goes against our best instincts. What do we see on social media, Anthony? It's one time after another finding out someone doesn't agree with you, and then you scream at them. You must be awful. You must be evil. You're in the wrong. That's not a way to build solidarity. It actually pushes people away from the political process. And it doesn't work talking about red versus blue things, because cognitive dissonance, it's created a trench warfare mentality. If the person is in another party from you, they must mean you harm. And so you don't take anything that they say for granted. You believe that they're lying to you and they're out to get you. Conversations start by, it's not what you say to them, it's what you ask. And it's asking people, what do you want? What are the things that you care about? What in your life feels a certain way? And guess what? A lot of them have been completely radicalized by right-wing propaganda, Fox News, online stuff, you name it. If you actually ask them what they believe in, they're likely to give you conspiracy theories, right? And they'll say things like, oh, I don't want teachers who are going to try and indoctrinate students. I don't want teachers who are going to groom students, you name it. And what do you say? You don't engage with that. You say, oh, I hear that you care about your child's education. And they're like, yeah, I do care about my child's education. And it's like, you know what? Maybe we agree on the fact that schools should have good funding in order to set children up in a right way. And all of a sudden you start to realize something. And this is like one of the secret weapons of all of this. We are all guilty of talking about this political divide. We hear it. America's more divided than ever. You know what happens when you look at polls and you look at what people have to say? We have an overwhelming consensus on the issues in this country. Most of the things that we fight about are created by the wealth class through think tanks and institutes and all of that. They create controversies and flashpoints. Most of the time, on the issues that matter, Americans agree by a division of 60 and 70 and 80% to 40, 30, and 20. It's the disinformation and conspiracy theories that keep us from talking to one another. So instead of talking at them and telling them how to vote, you ask what matters to them. And then you start talking about the things that actually can bring you together in order to make change. And then you're not asking for their vote. You're asking for solidarity. You say there's a group of people who are trying to keep us from talking and working with one another. And once you realize that, all of a sudden you have an ally as opposed to an enemy who wants to hurt you. I've seen this happen. I've seen it take place around the country in my organizing work. It always works unless you're talking to someone who is unreachable. Everybody else is reachable, and you can have conversations because deep down they want what's best for their kids and their countries and their lives. The other people are destructive and they're lost in a cult. You don't need to spend your time with them. The people who actually want these things but are confused, you can find common ground and you can start to build something.
Donald Trump is tanking in the polls, and it turns out that things like snatching people off the streets and not giving immigrants due process is something that does not play well with Republicans either. And for me, that is the key here. That is what binds us together, the idea that we share a common humanity. And so playing to the humanity of the debate is maybe the way to cut through, because Trump does not have any humanity and his henchmen do not have any humanity. And I think that is the differential going into this next election cycle, is that recognize, I mean, arguably Kamala Harris tried to do it with joy. I think she picked the wrong word, and the way they went about it was a little questionable. But ultimately, it was still a hugely popular movement. The idea of bringing it back to a place of humanity rather than of fascism. And now that we've experienced the fascism that she warned us of, now that it's actually happening, that the authoritarian regime is underway, it's not a threat anymore, it's a reality. And so I'm hoping that this kind of joined up human experience is the one that is going to encourage people to vote, more votes than they can suppress. I mean, that's the other thing. If you consider that there were potentially 90 million votes that never came about, and there's a recount going on in New York State at the moment. But what we're looking at potentially is a huge movement of people who care about each other and the country far more than the current king who has installed himself in the White House.
That's exactly right. And I think it also starts with something else that was a misstep back in 2024. Because I think where that campaign and that election went sideways was when it goes back to that neurosis of the Democratic Party, where it became conservative, and you started to hear, no, we'll take care of illegal immigration better. And you start having Liz Cheney show up, and you start thanking Dick Cheney for all of his service to the country. And that's a natural thing that happens with the Democratic Party, but you have to leave it behind. And the message needs to be this. Yeah, it's happening to that person over there that you don't know. It's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to your children. Don't you feel it? You know it. It's getting closer and closer and closer. And we've ignored it when it's happened around the world. We don't even, oftentimes going back to like slave conditions that the United States of America has fostered, we don't think about it when we use our iPhones. We don't think about it when we, eat crops that are even like cocoa that has been harvested under slave-like conditions. We don't think about that because it's out of sight, out of mind. Now that it's here, now that we can see the apparatus that's taking place, we can start to understand the threat. So you can't negotiate with it. You can't sacrifice people. And that needs to be the main message. It stops now. And if you come together in the numbers that we have seen, and if you start to press the issue, that barbarity and that cruelty and that violence and that oppression, it only gets worse. Because look what happened in Los Angeles. It wasn't even an out-of-control protest. He couldn't even handle the optics of it. He had to send in the National Guard and Marines to arrest American citizens. If you press the issue, the barbarity of the situation becomes more and more open, and people start to realize, oh, this isn't just strangers. This is happening to people down the street. This is happening to people that I know. And what have we seen? And I know the stories provide a catharsis, and people laugh at people. The leopard face eating party ate my face, right? And it's this thing of I told you so, and look at these people, how, they're rubes. They didn't understand what was happening, and now it's happening to them. You have to take advantage of that. When people start looking around and it's members of their community, people that they care about who are being disappeared and brutalized, there is an opportunity to say, see what's going on here. These are moments where cognitive dissonance can start to really build and people can change. And that is our opportunity at this point. And quite frankly, it's the last opportunity that we have, because otherwise it's only going to become more and more entrenched, and all these authoritarian elements are just going to metastasize further.
I want to finish by quoting Jose Gomez. He's the Los Angeles Archbishop who has... And, I don't normally quote faith leaders, but I actually think that faith leaders might be the solution to an awful lot of what we're seeing at the moment. And he's criticized Trump's aggressive immigration policy, blaming it for causing panic and fear with the ICE raids and everything else. But he's also talking about the fact that the Trump regime has no immigration policy other than trying to deport thousands of people every day. And that the fault does not lie with the immigrants themselves. He said this is not policy, it's punishment, and it can only result in cruel and arbitrary outcomes. And so if there was a decent immigration policy, then we wouldn't have these problems in the first place. Do you think that faith leaders coming together of all stripes and stepping up, as they did originally, I mean, this was, the church was a sanctuary, to see that separation from the extreme Christian nationalists, but actually look at our mainstream. I mean, we now have an American Pope, which should make a huge difference in this storyline if he, takes advantage of his responsibility and authority, which he may well do. We don't really know yet. But the solution could come from these non-political voices that people trust that will bring us together.
So 2 comments on this, both are from a religious sort of perspective. First things first, if people don't know what a sin eater is, I would recommend looking it up. And this is back in, old superstitious times when things started going wrong in a town or a village. A person would come in and they would take the blame for what was going on, and they would be scorned, but they were seen as a valuable member of that cycle. Immigrants right now are being treated like that. They are the scapegoats. The problem isn't immigration in this country. The problem is that America is in decline because the wealthy have hoarded all of the resources and things are getting worse. We wouldn't even be having these conversations about immigration if the situation was better in the United States of America. We're having this conversation because material conditions are worsening and the wealthy have decided to scapegoat these people. They've decided to make them the sin eaters, so to speak, of the situation. They are the ones responsible, as opposed to the fact that it's the wealthy who have caused this situation by not paying taxes, by getting rid of regulations, by taking everything for themselves for, the suffering of the rest of us. And when it comes to faith leaders, I think you're dead on. I'm an ex-evangelical. I grew up in the evangelical church. There's a reason why I've been so suspicious of Christian nationalism. It's because I saw it firsthand when I was a child. I saw these authoritarian communities filled with conspiracy theories. And watching it come together, it is, again, an ideology that gives people, they believe God is on their side. They're fighting against evil. And so whatever they do is right. This goes back even to St. Augustine, the idea of rightful persecution, which is the people are coming after me. They're coming after the one true church. We deserve to do whatever we want to them. Whatever happens to them, they have it coming because God is on our side. Having faith leaders stand up and say, this is not actually Christianity. This is, you've seen it, within all of these Gaza protests. You've seen people say, this actually isn't about Judaism or anti-Semitism. This is actually about, authoritarianism. Those people do an invaluable service, which is they create the opportunity for that ideology to not be totally monopolized by authoritarians who use it for their own purposes. Fascism and Nazism would not have worked without the Catholic Church and without the Christian element within Nazi Germany that ended up becoming, I believe, positive Christianity is what they called it. And if you actually take a look at that, these people are putting themselves on the line even as their own movements have become radicalized. They're invaluable. And people need to stand up and hear that being said so they understand that this is not actual dogma. This is a perversion of any religion, and which is what happens when religion and power combine. We've seen that time and time again.
Yes, hence the desire to bring the church and the state close together by the Trump regime. Okay, we have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you for your expertise and for your explanations, and I hope we get a chance to do it again really soon. Jared Yates Sexton, thank you.
I am so thankful, and I have to say, in the midst of such terrible, repulsive discourse and coverage, it is so emboldening and so heartening to see someone like yourself out here having these conversations. I wish you the best of luck. Please be safe, and can't wait to talk again.
Thank you so much. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.